Thanks, Ceithre, and Ceithre, an important pillar of government policy is to ensure that the horse and greyhound racing industries achieve their maximum potential and in doing so contribute to economic and social development over a wide geographic distribution. The horse and greyhound racing industries make a valuable contribution to a balanced regional economy, and it is estimated that the thoroughbred sector has an annual economic impact of €1.84 billion, with direct and indirect employment totalling 29,000 people, while the greyhound sector economically benefits an estimated 10,000 people. The thoroughbred sector in particular brings a high level of international investment into Ireland. Government funding, in addition to supporting these key industries, presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return on its investment, leading to a flow of income right throughout the economy. And support for certain strategic industries is important, of course, for future economic growth and to spread economic activity broadly across society and the country. The horse and greyhound racing industries receive financial support from the state through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund under Section 12 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act of 2001, and payments are made from the fund to Horse Racing Ireland, or HRI, and also to Rasia Conairn, or CE, for the greyhound sector. In the period 2001 to date, a total of €1.54 billion has been paid from the fund to the horse and greyhound racing industries in accordance with the provisions of the Act. The cumulative upper limit on payments from the fund provided for under the relevant regulations has been reached. Exchequer support provided from the fund is crucial to the continued development of the horse and greyhound racing industries. In order to give effect to the provisions of Budget 2023, this cumulative upper limit must be increased by regulation. The estimates for the department passed by both houses of the Oireachtas as part of next year's budget include an allocation of €91 million to the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund, which will be distributed in accordance with Section 12(6) of the Act, with 80% or €72 million going to HRI and 20% or €18.2 million going to Rasia Conairn. In order to allow the department to provide for the monies allocated in Budget 2023, it is necessary to comply with the technical requirements under Section 12(13) of the Act to increase the cumulative upper limit on the amount payable from the fund by €91 million, bringing it to €1.64 billion. This is achieved by way of regulation submitted to the House today, and the aggregate limit on the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund has been increased in this manner in 2004 as well as in the years 2009 until last year. The 2017 in relation to the horse racing industry, the 2017 Deloitte report into the economic impact of the Irish breeding and racing sector commissioned by Horse Racing Ireland indicates that the total direct and simulated expenditure of Irish breeding and racing amounts to and supports direct and indirect employment of 29,000 people, as I said earlier. The sector, or the horse racing, generates a very significant return to the rural economy in Ireland and a positive international profile for the country. And of course, behind all of these facts and figures are the thousands of men and women who directly and indirectly make Irish racing and breeding industry what it is. The Irish equine breeding and racing industry is extremely competitive, as we will all know, on a global level, and is a real beacon for excellence. Ireland is the second largest producer of bloodstock in the world by value sold after the USA, and we have the third highest number of thoroughbreds foaled each year after the USA and Australia. The importance of a strong welfare and integrity foundation is crucial, and this is well recognised throughout the industry, with the department working with Horse Racing Ireland and the Irish Horse Regulatory Board, Horse Racing Regulatory Board, the IHRB, and other relevant stakeholders to ensure that the highest standards of welfare and integrity are maintained. In that regard, in November of last year, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine, they published a report on horse racing in Ireland, and at that committee's request, an international equine anti-doping expert, Dr. Craig Suwan, was commissioned to conduct an independent review of the IHRB's equine anti-doping programme. And that review concluded that the programme does at least match international best practice in most respects and has made significant advances in recent years. But nevertheless, there is always further room for improvement, and further improvement is always possible. HRI has informed the department that it spent some €5.4 million on a suite of equine welfare initiatives last year, with €5.8 million to be spent now over the course of the current year. And these initiatives include support for animal welfare bodies to identify new careers for horses once they exit racing, and also infrastructural investments at racecourses to mitigate the risk to horses, and also support as well for the Irish Equine Centre. Touching the greyhound racing industry, Cathaoirleach, according to the 2021 Power Report, it supported up to 10,000 people deriving economic benefit from it. And the funding provided to the sector very much helps sustain a long-standing tradition of the industry, which is very much part of our history and heritage. Future funding is very much contingent on welfare standards being upheld, and this is reflected in the annual parameters set down by my department officials in their liaison with Rasia Clonan. The department, along with the sector itself, is committed to continued strengthening of welfare standards, and there is a strong commitment to improved animal welfare in the sector, for the sector through the programme for government. Provisions in the Greyhound Racing Act 2019, which came into effect in May of 2019, will make a real difference in this regard, with legislation strengthening the legal basis for the industry. And also it facilitates the board in focusing on its primary objective of achieving the highest standards of care and welfare of greyhounds. So overall, this is important funding. It's to follow through in the budget provision, which was voted already and approved by the House. This follows on to the engagement today from a very comprehensive engagement at Oireachtas Agriculture Committee, where the funding was strongly examined and teased over and discussed. I've just come from the Dáil, where it was discussed for an hour again, and now, as part of the requirements on us, discussing it here today for an hour as well. So it's unlike almost any other vote in the level of scrutiny and discussion that gets in the Houses of Oireachtas, and I think that's a very positive thing. So,
Aaron, thank you for coming into Seanad today. Before I call on Senator Paul Daly, could I welcome to the gallery from the College of Charleston in South Carolina all the students who come here to Leinster House. Of course, one of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence from South Carolina was a guy named Thomas Lynch, an Irishman, and Councillor Stephen Stokes is here with them as well today, and I know John McGahan was entertaining them as well earlier. I told them about the Dáil bar, which John forgot to tell them. But I'm sure you'll get there later. But thank you for coming to the Senate today. Could I now call on Senator Paul Daly?
I want to welcome Minister McConalogue here today to discuss this issue, and I also want to welcome our visitors from South Carolina. And as I have at the outset, I want to propose the motion, and I be strongly in favour of the motion. I suppose for the record, it might be important for me to put on the record that I am a horse owner and I'm a former chairperson of a rural racetrack in Keogan for 14 years. So I suppose one would be right in saying I have vested interests. But that aside, as I say, I welcome the funding, and I want to condone with what the Minister said in conclusion about the scrutiny that this particular vote of the budget gets annually. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, we had a long meeting where we teased it out, and each and every aspect of it was discussed with the department officials and the Minister by the committee members, and it has been in it all, and now it's here, and again we'll get plenty of scrutiny here. But at the end of the day, as you quite rightly say, Minister, the value of this money to our rural community is, it's priceless. It's impossible to actually put a value on what is gained in rural Ireland. And it's an old saying, you have to speculate to accumulate. And as investments go, I think from a government perspective and from the economy's perspective, the amount of money we're talking about here investing in horse and greyhound racing, when one looks at the rewards that are reaped from that through tourism, through the jobs in rural Ireland that would not be there otherwise without the small trainers of both greyhounds and horses, the farmers who are supplying those trainers with haylage, the local co-ops who are supplying meal, and then the transportation to and from racecourses. When you cumulatively add up all that take from the investment, it is creating a massive reward for the economy. But having said that, there will always be, I suppose, issues and questions as to how the money is spent within both sectors, and animal welfare will always come to the fore in any debate. And I welcome the fact, Minister, that you said that your officials will scrutinise and do scrutinise with both HRI and RCE their policies on animal welfare going forward within the sectors. We in the Agriculture Committee produced a report recently on issues impacting dog welfare and the entire animal welfare area. And I think it's vitally important at this juncture that that report would be dealt with and that the overall animal welfare, equine, canine and all domestic animals would be treated seriously and would have the debate and indeed receive the legislation that it so richly deserves. Because sometimes when we're discussing just the equine and the canine in the context of the sport animals, while it's vitally important that the utmost of animal welfare standards are set, there are a lot of other animals outside that sphere that are not encompassed by HRI or RCE, and they need to be included and have top quality welfare structures. So the whole welfare issue, I think, is a broader debate for another day to encompass all animals. But having said that, within the two sectors that we're talking about, I welcome the improvements that are made, and to quote the old saying of a former leader of ours, while there's a lot done, there's a lot more to be done. And we had, as you know, Minister, we had a lot of meetings at the Agricultural Committee meeting about the anti-doping issues in horses, based on media commentary and some accusations by individuals within the sport. And to be quite honest, as a member of that committee, while we did a comprehensive report and it has been passed on to where it needs to be passed on to, I would still have a lot of questions in that sphere. There were a lot of questions left unanswered, and there are a lot of accusations out there which are still hanging and have never been proven definitively to have been false. And while I welcome the CO1 report and, as I said, the investment of the share of the money they're getting by HRI within animal welfare, I still think this is an issue that we cannot afford to take our eye off the ball on. And I welcome the fact that you're saying that some of the conditions of this money being paid annually is trashed out with the relevant bodies. Another debate which came up in committee and often comes up in this regard is the volume of this money which eventually goes to prize money, and the perception that it's a smaller number of larger owners or trainers who are receiving the vast majority of this money. While, as I say, as a small owner who would be on a very low rung of the ladder, I would like to see a lot more of that money filtering down. But if we don't set the high standards, we will not maintain our position as standard bearers within the horse and greyhound industry in the world. And it is the top prize money that attracts having the best stallions and the best mares situated in Ireland. In any sport, the competitors follow the money. And I suppose an example I used in committee, and I'll use again today, is the money that's in the Premiership in England is the reason the League of Ireland in Ireland is as weak as it is, because the players and the sponsors and everybody concerned will follow that money. So if we allow our standards to drop, our horse owners, our big horse owners and our top horses will end up going to the Middle East or going to the UK or going to Australia to follow the prize money. So we have to keep that in a parity, and then there is a filtration system down. If we're not at the top, we will have a problem at all levels. There were two issues, Minister, that I'd like to see you have an input with the HRI in particular when it comes to how to distribute their money. And there are two infrastructural projects which have been on the cards for a long time. One is the National Equine Centre, and the second is a second all-weather track, which I would love to see some of the money being filtered through to progress those two projects. And as I say, when we were discussing the anti-doping, all our samples are going off island to be tested. So I think it would be vitally important that the investment is made in a National Equine Centre, which would include laboratories, and we will be able to test our samples on island.
Senator Sharon Keogan.
Thank you, Keogan. Minister, you're very welcome into the Chamber today. I'm very happy to stand in support of this motion, the annual one, to raise the state funding cap for the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund. A lot is said every year about the improvements that could be made in the industry, with animal welfare being a top priority. I support the proper and humane treatment of the animals involved in these sports. Every assistance should be given to the governing bodies to implement top-level standards of care for horse and greyhounds alike. There are those, of course, who would point to areas of possible improvement such as these and say, on account of some practices not being perfect, we should scrap everything and ban everything too. If you ban everything that wasn't perfect in this country, you'd have nothing left. Many politicians didn't grow up in places where these sports and participations in the community in them were woven into the fabric of a shared community life. Let us not forget that horse racing, the thoroughbred industry and greyhound racing is vibrant and important parts of the culture and economy of this country, particularly the rural economy and rural life. Ireland as a whole has a long and proud tradition of horse racing. Cork had the honour of being the birthplace of the steeplechase back in 1752, which I feel could only ever have started in Ireland. Horse racing in Bellewstown in County Meath, where I am a volunteer, unpaid member of the committee, took place even before that in 1726. Horse racing provides direct and indirect employment of 29,000 people, generating 1.9 billion annually for the economy. Ireland is the third biggest producer of thoroughbred foals in the world, and we attract significant interest and investment globally as a result of our high standard in this sector. Significant employment and economic benefit is derived from greyhound racing too. With the investment of 91 million into the industry in budget 2023, steady increases in the standard of care able to be afforded animals can take place, and our national racing standards can be improved upon as well. For all that it brings to our country and our communities, I will be supporting this motion.
Tim Lombard.
Thank you, Chair. May I formally second the motion if it's required. I think it's a very important motion that's brought before the House of the Oireachtas and through the committee. And it's not my first time speaking this. I think we've had this motion on a continuous annual basis going through the House of the Oireachtas. I think it's in a very appropriate way to deal with the issue, but it just gives you the level of scrutiny that's required for this motion itself. And even though I didn't make the Agricultural Committee for the day that I went through the hearings, I was unfortunately somewhere else. I watched it after, and it was very considerable, the actual level of engagement from the committee, which I'm a member of, regarding this issue. And I want to compliment the members of the committee that are in the House here today. We have at least three, and they were very much on top of their game when it comes to making sure that due scrutiny was given to this piece of legislation itself. And it's gone through the entire rigours of the Houses, and now it's come to the Seanad. And it just gives you the commitment that we have to make sure that the fund that we're putting in place is a fund that's well scrutinised. I know no other fund that's put through such a rigorous role of making sure that it's debated on a continuous annual basis to make sure it's appropriate. And I honestly do believe it's appropriate. I think I was only sitting down thinking about my own little parish and how many people would have a greyhound, how many people have a horse, and how they're intertwined with this actual fund itself at some level. And it's a really significant impact it has on rural Ireland in particular, and also urban Ireland, but in particular rural Ireland. And in my own small little district, I was naming in my own head that there's 6 at least have horses, and there's another 4 or 5 that have greyhounds. And I think, you know, that's a significant part of our community. We're from a small little place called Manan Bridge. Like, it just gives you the indication of how intertwined the actual industry is in small rural parishes. And I think that's something that we just need to be very much aware about when it comes together, when you're putting funds in place. And this economic package that is put together, as other senators have rightly said, actually is a benefit back to the economy itself. Like, it really does, pound for pound, pay money back into the economy. And I think that's a significant driver for so many people that comes to rural Ireland. And what I want to see in many ways is just to acknowledge the amounts of change that has happened within the industry in the last few years. When I entered the Oireachtas in 2016, there was, in many ways, and particularly over the greyhound industry, there was issues pertaining to traceability in particular. We've seen huge changes in a very, very short space of time. We've seen huge changes regarding greyhounds and where they go after their life of racing. And I think that's a really significant change in ethos and approach by the industry. And that's what we need to see, because the industry needs to move forward, and that has to be a part of the industry being sustainable going forward. So I'd like to fully support this motion before us tonight, and I think it's an appropriate motion, and I believe it will benefit the industry, and it will also benefit rural Ireland, which needs that support to keep going when it comes to the economic issues that it needs. Thank you, Chair.
Pauline O'Reilly.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. And let me first say, as everyone is probably going to expect me to say, the Green Party is fundamentally against the greyhound industry. And in fact, our manifesto says that we believe that it should be phased out. Public funding, at least, should be phased out for the greyhound industry. And it is has been a challenge for us. We know on entering government that we had to make compromises, and this is a compromise that I find incredibly difficult. But I think that it's really important that I stand up every year to make the case that we need to decouple greyhound racing and horse racing, because they are two fundamentally different activities. And let's really look at the statistics. People don't like it. People don't like greyhound racing, and it's dying out. I live in a city where we have a greyhound racing track, and it provides next to no employment because it's all very casual, and it's people are not dependent on it for their income. So let's be really honest about it. I find it quite upsetting when people use rural Ireland as an excuse for everything. You know, it's questionable that we would say that we'll push industry over the welfare of animals, and I think that that is what's happening when it comes to greyhound racing. Additionally, what people may not realise is that all of the funding comes from gambling, and it all goes into this one industry in horse racing and greyhound racing, and I do think that it needs to be more evenly spread, and indeed the Federation of Irish Sport feels that it needs to be more equally spread across all sports. So let's look at the actual money itself. 91 million, that's how much is going this year to horse and greyhound racing funding, and it's split 80%, 20% between horse racing and greyhound racing. 18.2 million is going to Rossiacht Con Éireann, and if I compare that to some of the other things that we spend that kind of money on, we've doubled the funding now for the National Parks and Wildlife Service to 53 million under this government. That's really, really positive. But it wasn't far off what was actually going into greyhound racing up until this government came into being. And that just makes no sense to me, because underlying this is actually funding from this state that's going to the UK. We see 6,300 pups that are exported every year to the industry in the UK. Those are pups that are raised on that 18.2 million. They're using the Irish funding to promote an industry in another country. And we're standing by and watching that happen. In addition to that, there's a surplus of 6,000 greyhound pups, so that's another 6,000 on top of that 6,300. And these dogs never make it to a racing track. They're never chipped and traced. We don't know where they go. Some are rehomed, some are exported without trace, and perhaps some disappear. We just don't know. So I know that under the law there is a requirement that in order for the fund to be distributed, the strategic plans of the industries must not be deficient or unreasonable. And I think that that's correct for the horse racing industry. I do think that that's correct. But I don't think that it is correct for the greyhound industry. Because even in a small way, if you look at the strategic plans, in one part they're saying that they want to dramatically reduce the number of dogs bred, and in another part they're saying that they want to offer breeding incentives. So even in that small way, the strategic plan just doesn't stack up. And the reason that our hands are tied is because the funding is tied to the horse racing industry, which is not a bad industry. So I think a really simple thing to do, if we want transparency, is just decouple the two. As I argued last year, and in fact, as my colleague Nasa Horrigan is also arguing, just decouple them, and it allows a lot better transparency. And ultimately, I think that people would realise that let that industry see if it can survive without the funding from gambling. And if it can, fair enough, that's its own business. But it shouldn't be the business of the state to support it, not when we know about the welfare issues, not when we know that it's funding for another country, and not when we know that it's actually something that is dying out, that only 16% of people say they support. I know that I'm not going to be successful today, but I think that it's important that I keep coming up and standing up and saying it, so that eventually we will get some political success with this. And I think if people were really honest and went back to their constituents, they'd find that there really isn't that many people in anybody's constituency that backs greyhound racing. Thank you.
Anish, Senator Lynn Boylan has asked to move for Amendment 2 on the order paper. Could I call?
Yeah, so will I move the amendments now?
Have a seconder? Seconder.
Thanks.
Saves things coming up.
So that's the two amendments moved. And look, the two amendments, I'll speak to them in the course of the speech. I believe my ears should have been burning, Minister, that you were referring to me in the Dáil chamber when I wasn't there. I'm quite open about my views on greyhound racing. I've made no bones about it. It's like rugby. I don't particularly like rugby either, but I will always advocate for greater safety measures in rugby and to protect people. And likewise, I'll come in here and I will argue on behalf of the dogs and the greyhound racing to improve animal welfare issues. And I think that's in the interest of anybody who actually is in favour of greyhound racing. You want it to continue, you want it to be successful, then I think you have to deal with the animal welfare issues that are still outstanding. And if you want to talk about running with the hare and running with the ground, I think you should be more concerned about your colleagues' comments on refugees, if you want to talk about double standards. But look, the amendments we've submitted, one of them is around looking for an economic impact report on it, and it is to do with that issue around the 80-20 split, because, Minister, in the committee you claim that the funding allocation is determined on the basis of the business cases brought by the dogs. But on the current legislation, one organisation could send in a comprehensive proposal for additional funding and the other could send in a one-pager, and they both would still get the funding because they're linked together. So there's nothing about the individual business plans that impacts on whether or not they get the money, because they are both linked to each other. And even the organisations involved have said that they don't have a problem with the decoupling of the 80-20 split. So I don't understand where the resistance is coming from if people are being honest about not having an issue with that 80-20 split, because surely each organisation should be applying on the merit of its own business plan. In committee, Minister, I also raised the findings of the Preferred Results Report of 2017. That report stated that the greyhound industry is no longer a racing-centric industry, but it is rather one that has a primary focus on breeding. And the focus on breeding raises concerns on what happens to the dogs that don't make the cut. But I'll get to that in a minute around the traceability. But what I want to hear, if we're going to be giving public money to the industry, is has Rasiocht Conhéireann set out how they intend to address the issues of overbreeding that was flagged in that Preferred Results report? Because aside from the ethics of overbreeding, we can put that aside, it doesn't make any commercial sense for an organisation to be producing so many dogs, especially when the market for that oversupply, so we can get to what happens to the poor dogs that don't make the cut, but the oversupply are going to Britain. Currently 82 to 85% of dogs racing in Britain are Irish bred dogs. Yet British Greyhound Board recently published their strategic vision document, in which they stated that their aim is to take steps to promote breeding and rearing of greyhounds in Britain and to encourage the owners and the trainers to acquire the puppies from reputable British breeders and rearers with high welfare standards. So, Minister, has Rasiocht Conhéireann carried out a risk assessment of the impact of a fall-off in sales of Irish greyhounds in Britain? What plans are they going to put in place to ensure that those dogs that would have gone to Britain will actually be cared for here? And that brings me on to the traceability measures that have been taken since the RTE expose in 2019. The Irish Coursing Club provides the software for both the Irish microchip system and the British microchip system, but only one is registered with EuroPetNet. So again, given that 85% of the dogs that are registered on the British microchip system, that's a significant purchasing power that Rasiocht Conhéireann has. Have they insisted that the microchip system in Britain also be linked into EuroPetNet, because that would allow us to have full traceability of the movement of dogs if they were linked into that EuroPetNet system, which many British microchip systems are. So it's nothing to do with Brexit. Likewise, can we insist that all retired greyhounds would be only re-registered onto EuroPetNet databases on retirement? Because again, that would allow us the greater transparency. It also brings me on to the claims that the fund, 10% of the funding goes on animal welfare and integrity. I think that the 10% needs to be ring-fenced completely for animal welfare. I think we're conflating different issues, because when you look at integrity, it's also dealing with the issue of drugs and the drugging of dogs. So if drugging of dogs is considered an animal welfare issue, then why are dogs that are found to have cocaine in their systems not seized on welfare grounds? If it's welfare funding and it's all linked, why are they not being seized on that? And it's also deeply concerning that the track deaths have gone up by 29% in 2021. And in the committee, Minister, you referred to figures that were during COVID, and you tried to conflate COVID issues and all of that. The reality is that the figures compared to the last pre-COVID races, it's gone up 29% track deaths. Now, that has to be of concern to anybody who's interested in greyhound racing. Why are greyhound deaths going up? In Britain, they've actually reduced their fatality rates. They also have vets at all trials, and they also have an outright ban on surgical artificial insemination, which we have the amendment because the Joint Oireachtas Committee of the Agriculture has called for a similar ban here to include greyhounds. And the committee was told by a vet that even in sterile conditions, surgical AI carries risks and is a highly invasive procedure. So given that that recommendation got cross-party support at committee, I'm sure there will be no problem in supporting such a ban here. And I will conclude, Cathaoirleach. But the final issue of concern, and again I raised this with you in committee, is the Irish Greyhound Owners Organisation recommending that that members do not give dogs to welfare organisations that have an anti-racing status. Now, that's completely inappropriate. It's public money that's funding the Irish Retired Greyhound Trust Fund. That money is used to help some of the welfares that take the excess dogs that the IRGT can't deal with themselves. They have a 4 to 5 month waiting list. It's completely inappropriate that the greyhound owners and breeders are telling their members not to give dogs to shelters that are actually looking to put dogs in forever homes.
Senator Annie Hoey. You're moving your amendment? Senator Hoey?
I was checking if the amendment had been moved and seconded.
There one has, yeah. You're speaking to your amendment?
Yep, I'll speak to my amendment as well, please.
Yep. Seconded? Do you want
Right,
to move it?
thank you.
Not yet, but we have to move it in secret. Yeah.
Second, Liz.
Look, Cathaoirleach Minister, it's absolutely no secret that, or what my views on animal welfare are, there's no secret in this House, and I've spoken about them in here to you, to other people, and I have a long-standing history on this. I abhor animal cruelty, and I do not have faith nor belief that this fund is necessary or the best use of monies at this moment in time. I've never voted in favour of this fund, and I won't be voting in favour of this fund, and the consequences of that I will deal with it in my own time. As animal welfare issues come up all the time in Irish society, and people have a very visceral response to this. I was only in here a couple of months ago talking about Dublin Zoo and animal welfare issues in there, and people had a really visceral response to this. And we've seen that visceral response in relation to the greyhound industry. I need not reference the infamous RTE programme on that, which resulted in a really visceral response from the Irish public. And Senator O'Reilly referenced the fact that in a poll, 16% of the public have said that they continue to support the industry, which means 84% of those polled do not support the industry. And that is a really significant number, and I think it's something that needs to be taken very, very seriously. And I think, based on some of the responses to that, I think the least that we can do is look at how we regulate the system and look at how we fund greyhound and horse racing. I know that horse and greyhound racing are supported by the state through their own ring-fenced statutory fund, with a significant amount of that fund going towards prizes. And this has been a debate that's happened over the past couple of weeks. Those prizes tend to go to the most successful. Close to 50 million in tax-free prizes go to some of the richest people in Ireland, not all of which pay tax here, and that is, I don't know that is the best use of this fund. Correct me if I'm wrong. The horse racing industry receives financial support from the state through the Horse and Racing Greyhound Fund, with 72.8 million having been allocated to support horse racing in 2023, 80% of which can be applied to prize money. 80% of this fund can be applied to prize money. Like, that's an incredible amount of money going into prizes. That's absolutely wild. And and I think when people sit down and actually think about that, I don't think that they think that is a good use of funds. And I know, Minister, I listened to your debate with Deputy Murphy, you know, when you were talking about both sides, you know, of this on the radio, and you said yourself, in terms of winnings, it's a loss-making industry for those who take part in it. It's by and large a hobby, which actually costs those who are involved in it. So we know that this is an industry that is not making money. We know that this is an industry that is in decline. A level of interest for greyhound racing has been in decline since 2008, with I think in 2008 1.1 million people attending, to as little as about 73,000 in the first few months of this year. And besides the declining, and I think that's a rapid decline of interest, each year 6,300 greyhounds are sold to the UK at a loss of almost €5,000 each. Like, that's a lot of money that this industry is hemorrhaging out of it. And I think if we are a state that seeks to promote compassion and kindness, and that is what we talk very much in this House and both Houses about, compassion and kindness, and I think we need to look at vulnerable animals in our society, and I don't think it's enough that we can be concerned about humanitarian action. I think we as a nation need to have, and I'm not just talking about this industry, we need to have a look at how we consider animal welfare overall in this country, because I do not think we are looking at it in the right way. And I have to be honest, I believe that the greyhound and horse racing industry monetises for animal suffering, and we are watching this cruel act of war against our animals for profit right in front of our eyes. I need not go into some of the ways that the animals in this industry are being treated. You know, we justify the killing of an innocent dog because they can't continue to make profiteers money. Greyhounds, 38 greyhounds are killed each month in the industry for overbreeding. Is a figure that that's repugnant. You know, and we have a motion here which I think actually is a very balanced motion, Minister. I note that I went through some of your things. You don't call out people when you're dealing with any other bill or amendment for not putting in a motion at any other point. You know, this is the motion that we have in front of us, and I noticed in the other House you're skewering people for not putting in motions or doing anything in between. We know this motion comes up every year, and we're putting an amendment in, and I think this amendment is a really balanced amendment. We're asking you to look at how the industry is funded. We're asking you to determine, is this the best use of fund? We're asking you how to best support the sectors. We have a workers' rights element to this amendment. You know, we recognise that this is something that is still a strong part of some communities, but that this is a declining part of some communities. And we want you, as Minister, to take this amendment and to look at how this fund is distributed, look at the rights of the workers in the sector and how that can be improved, and an employment regulation order to introduce a set minimum rates of pay and conditions. And also, as has been referenced before, this fund you know, comes from a betting levy, but it only goes towards the horse and greyhound fund, and I think the distribution of funding towards other sports areas is something that needs to be looked at and considered. So look, I've laid out my personal bona fides on this. I've expressed this before. You know, I come from a family that used to breed and race horses. We used to have the Crufty point-to-point literally outside our front window. We could have sat and watched it if we wanted to, but we don't do that anymore. We don't have horse racing on our land anymore. We recognise that that is not a sustainable way to treat animals. It's not the right way to treat animals. And I really am asking you, Minister, to consider our amendment. It is fair, it is balanced, it is giving you an opportunity to come back to both Houses with how we can look at this fund, and I'm really imploring you to consider that. But just upon the record, I won't be voting in favour of this fund, and I never will be.
Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Thank you very much, and I might begin by just saying I would actually echo those calls on the Minister to consider or accept some of the amendments put forward by a number of groups. Obviously, I have my own, which I'm going to go through one by one now, but constructive proposals have been put forward by other parties, and they are ones which will, if accepted, would mean that we were in a better position next year. And I say that after a number of years of having this roll through again and again and again. And again, the same issues are coming up, and they are not being properly addressed. And I think it would be very good if we were to see something different coming through next year. And I think that these amendments calling for reviews would, in fact, Minister, put us in the position of having a better proposal, and indeed I'd say a better set of propositions, separate propositions, put to the House next year. I'm going to speak first to Amendment 5 and then come back to 4 and others. My Amendment number 5, Minister, like others have stated, it calls for the need to separate the horse and greyhound fund into two separate funds. We've heard that the business case for one and the business case for the other there are issues with both, but the business case in terms of greyhound racing really does not stand up. And again, I say that as somebody who, regardless of the business case, has extremely significant animal welfare concerns in relation to it. But also, it is something when we see animal welfare concerns and the damage done by an industry set aside, and set aside not even for any meaningful benefit to anybody, but in fact to prop up a industry where the public have spoken with their feet by moving away in droves from it. And again, the very low percentages of support are there. So again, Minister, I think we need to have separate discussions and honest discussions in relation to both of these separate areas next year. And I would urge that we would, instead of having a single motion, have two motions before us at that point. In amendment number 4, I focus again, and again I say this in the context of, I agree with others who I believe that we need to phase out greyhound racing in Ireland. I think it is to prop it up in the way that it has been done, especially when it is becoming effectively a breeding industry, and when that breeding industry raises very significant concerns, is unconscionable. However, in the interim, one of the positive measures that we do have was, and again this related to an amendment put forward by myself and Senator Ruan when the Greyhound Racing Act 2019 passed through these houses. And an amendment was inserted at that time in relation to requiring provision for the rehoming of greyhounds. So, Minister, I follow that amendment on the rehoming of greyhound with great interest, because it is one that myself and Senator Ruan successfully inserted at that time. And I'm very concerned that over the last year it seems that the provisions in section 29, again around funding for welfare and around rehoming, seem to be moving backwards. There's a report in August this year in the Examiner that the Irish Greyhound Racing Authority had stopped funding to one of its key welfare programmes because they felt the programme was unsustainable within its budget, or deprioritised indeed within its budget. That they indefinitely paused their relationship with the Irish Greyhounds to America programme because of the rates in transporting dogs to the US. And very concerningly, that the GPA, there has been signals that the Irish Greyhound Owners and Breeders Federation sending out a reminder and a note to greyhound owners telling them not to use rescue or rehoming services, which are critical of the greyhound racing industry. And that the Irish Retired Greyhound Trust, again, which is funded effectively by the state, that they should only be engaging with rehoming services which refrain from criticising the industry, even though rehoming is just a small gesture towards tackling the key issues, which are overbreeding. You know, we can rehome and it's important, but if we continue to overbreed to the point where you have thousands of dogs each year that never get to race and other thousands of dogs that are exported, of course those who care enough to drive and deliver animal welfare and rehoming services also will be critical of that which is creating a large amount of dogs needing rehoming. So again, Minister, under section 29, there is a requirement for regulations. They can be updated. They require consultation with you. So I really would appreciate indication of how you intend to engage in relation to the implementation of section 29. And my amendment number 4 calls for a report showing how the obligation in respect of rehoming has in fact been delivered. Because it seems that a lot of these schemes that started in 29 because they were required are now being pulled away from, and indeed the funding is being redirected away from welfare and even away from rehoming. And again, the levels of track deaths, up 29%, is a very worrying signal in respect of welfare. Again, if this industry is dying, let's not have it be the case that they allow many, many dogs to die first before they accept that their financial model is indeed on its last legs. I finally finished I have to just formally move my other 2 amendments, but I'll be very brief. Amendments 6 and 7, these are amendments in respect of the Human Rights and Equality Act and the allocation to community projects. And again, this is more targeted in relation to horse racing. I note that there is a public duty in equality and human rights that applies to all public bodies and all publicly funded bodies, and I think it would be appropriate if we looked to how some of the funding, for example the large amounts of funding directed into prizes, might be reallocated towards community projects encouraging, for example, healthy and safe horse ownership in urban areas, responding to the 2019 report on traveller horse ownership.
I have to call the Minister.
And apologies, I come to the point.
So,
Minister, I'd like that you would look at Amendment 6 as a constructive proposal for more community engagement and making this actually a more meaningful fund in terms of horse racing. And I'd like to formally move number 7 as well.
Senator Buttimer.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and welcome Minister McConalogue to the House, and to welcome the debate we're having tonight here. And can I put on record that I'm neither an owner, a breeder of greyhounds or of horses, but I'm an extraordinary supporter of the industries, which I think we need to have a balanced debate in these houses on. Because if you were to listen to some of this discourse tonight here, you would think that the men and women who work in our greyhound and in our horse racing industry have no care, have no concern, and are only motivated by one thing, which is very unfair. Minister, can I welcome the allocation of £72.8 million to Horse Racing Ireland, and to commend you for the work that you're doing. And yes, the funding is significant, and the contribution of our horse racing and of our greyhound industry to our national psyche, our rural community, and our economies, both urban and rural, is absolutely extraordinary. And it's not about jobs, which are important, and it's not about balanced regional development. But I can tell you, to all of those who are watching and listening, to be in Cork Greyhound Track last Saturday, 2 weeks, and to see the buzz and the excitement and the interest in the Irish Greyhound Laurels, the biggest crowd in Cork Greyhound Track in a long time. And I want to commend Frank Nyan and Jimmy Barry Murphy and all involved in the greyhound industry for bringing the Laurels back to October, or the autumn of the year, and to ensure that the Cork track was full last Saturday, the night of the final. In the 2021 report by Jim Power, the economics and financial significance of the Irish greyhound industry, it's worth reading for a number of reasons. And there's a telling line in it: without government support, and I'm quoting, there will be considerable implications for rural employment and economic activity. And that's a very important line. And some of the political parties in these houses of Oireachtas are speaking about rural Ireland is dying, or government isn't doing enough for rural Ireland. Well, we have two industries, which Senator Daly very eloquently outlined, are at the heart and the core of rural Ireland. And Senator Lombard speaks about Manan Bridge, a great place for greyhounds and for horses. Up the road you have Roberts Plain in Belgooly with show jumping. Are we really saying that a sport that has brought so much joy, economic benefit to our country, we're going to just flick a switch and write it off? Is that what we're saying? Look at the row this week between Gordon Elliott and it's not Nicky Henderson, I can't even know, come back to me, about the state of Irish racing versus British racing. The quality, Paul Nichols, sorry. Look at the row we had this week. This morning in the Transport Committee we had Michael O'Leary, an entrepreneur, a businessman, and the investment he's given to horse racing in our country. Are we seriously saying that the joy of winning up the hill in Cheltenham, or heading to Epsom to win, or going over across America with the Breeders' Cup or whatever, is not going to be of benefit to our country? And then we look at the breeding, and we see the renowned acclaim that Coolmore, for example, is held across the world. So let's have a real debate about the greyhound industry in terms of its challenges, and they are facing challenges. There is a declining attendance, there's tracks being closed, but the Greyhound Act that Senator Higgins spoke about of 2019 puts in place in a legal stature the need for strong regulation, and if you look at the whole greyhound traceability system, for example, it enables greyhounds to be traced throughout their lives. 2021, Russia Con Aaron system was introduced. Again, system introduced in terms of greyhound welfare. So, Minister, I think it's important that we look at the whole issue, and we shouldn't shy away from the fact that, as Senator Daly said, there are issues that need to be addressed, and we have issues in terms of Horse Racing Ireland, in terms of the board and the appointment of a chief executive in the greyhound industry. But I'm confident that our industry will stand up to scrutiny, and will be one that will be recognised as being a good one. And I do accept that Senator Hoey rightly said there were elements in that primetime report that were disturbing. Those of us who love those two sports do not get any joy in issues of welfare being brought forward and people being found guilty, and they should be held to account. I'll make no apology for saying that. But any of the people that I know who are involved with greyhounds, involved with horse racing, are very important. Minister, Senator Daly touched on a very important point that we need to, and it's not necessarily for this debate, but it's one that we need to dwell on, is the issue of all-weather tracks. We've seen the success of Dundalk. And I know Senator Daly's in Kilbeggan, which is in the Midlands, which could well be a very good venue for an all-weather track. I'm not saying you're looking for that, Senator Daly, but I'm just saying, given the area, it's something we need to look at, because we do see days lost, we do see issues of welfare around the heavy ground that could be addressed by the all-weather track, in particular, given the location of Kilbeggan, Senator Daly. Maybe that might be a location in the middle of the country, but I'm just saying as an example. But Minister, in the round, the challenges that have been faced have been met by the greyhound and horse racing industry, and I think it's important that we support it and recognising the economic importance to our country and to the creation of jobs, and also to the national psyche that it brings. Gormagat.
Senator Victor Boyhan, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Gael, and I'm conscious of time. So first I want to welcome the Minister to the House. And I say at the end of the day, this is a multi-million funding for horse and greyhound racing. And I do believe it should carry conditions in terms of corporate governance, an area that we haven't talked a lot about here today, corporate governance, and indeed a conditionality around animal welfare. And I think there is much merit in the proposals of many of the amendments, and I think there's been a lot of debate on all sides in relation to the reoccurring theme of animal welfare. I'd like to thank Senator O'Reilly, particularly because I think she was courageous and brave and forthright and honest in her contribution here today. But at the end of the day, it is a tripartite government. The government coalition budget in 2023 agreed in principle of 91 million to be allocated to the fund, and it's proposed now by you to allocate 72.8 million of this amount to Horse Racing Ireland and 18.2 million to the Irish Greyhound Board. But that's a decision that was made by the government and agreed and voted on, and the people in question know who they are. So the Oireachtas, as you said, Minister, rightly have approved a process of allocation, and this is by regulation, which in some ways is somewhat technically different to the general estimated allocation of your department. I suppose, Minister, if I was to make one ask, I'd say this. I would ask that you would include specific requirements on corporate governance and animal welfare in your parameters letter, and you'd be very familiar, there's a parameters letter issued by you after this approval. And I'm aware of the parameters letter that you issued last year. And so you have, Minister, and you'll be aware of that, and you might confirm that to us, you have the scope within your parameters letter to issue certain conditions and conditionality in relation to the funding. And I would ask you to reflect on the contributions here today and to consider incorporating very strong language and guidance and conditions in relation to animal welfare and in relation to corporate governance. And we've seen from another sporting industry, Horse Sports Ireland, where there are issues around governance. I want to acknowledge that you have a Working Together for Animal Welfare been a great promoter of the policy, and I have it in my hand. And I would ask also, Minister, that you might agree sometime early in the new year to facilitate a debate on animal welfare based on the objectives and the delivery of the key objectives of the Working Together for Animal Welfare, which is your policy document. And I know you personally are committed to it and have spoken many times in the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So really my ask is, Minister, that you would give due consideration to the items that were discussed in the content of the motions and on animal welfare issues and on corporate governance, but that you would use your functions and your powers in your parameters letter to stipulate strict guidance in terms of animal welfare and corporate governance. I think they're critically important, and I'd be interested in hearing about that in your response. Thank you, Minister.
Well, good. Minister, before I bring you in, could I welcome to the gallery Shane and Owen Carroll, who are here on tour, godson of Sheena Burke. You're most welcome to Seanad, and thanks for coming to the Senate today. Could I now call on the Minister? Minister.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and listen, thank you to all of the senators for the contribution and for the very engaging debate in relation to the fund, which, as I said at the outset, I think is healthy and important, and the level of oversight of this particular fund is without real parallel in relation to the scrutiny it gets between the Seanad, the Dáil and the Oireachtas Committee as a requirement every year in relation to the actual budget decision being implemented and provided for. So I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of Senator Daly, Keogan, Lombard, Senator O'Reilly, Senator Boylan, Senator Hoey, Senator Higgins, Buttimer and Boyhan. And listen, I mean, I know one of the key themes that has run through all of the contributions is the absolute importance of animal welfare and integrity in relation to both the horse racing and the greyhound sector. And that is something that is absolutely paramount for the government as well. I know absolutely paramount for both Horse Racing Ireland and Rasia Con Éireann as well. And is a key requirement in relation to the funding from the government to both industries. And it is important to acknowledge that both are industries, and industries which actually underpin very significant employment. Horse racing sector in particular, with up to almost 30,000 people employed either directly and indirectly, and an overall economic benefit of €1.8 billion, and very significant economic impact across the country from the horse racing sector and also from the greyhound sector as a result of government policy in this regard, and indeed, particularly in the horse racing sector, competing internationally with countries in multiple of our population, and indeed a multiple as well of the actual funding from government into those sectors. So it's really important in relation to both that we actually fund them strongly, that we keep consistent policy from a government point of view, and fund both organisations. And in relation to both those state agencies, they are composed then of boards and organisations which are very reflective of the stakeholders within both sectors, and which are charged with ensuring that in relation to how the funding is provided, is invested, that is done in the most effective way possible, and very much with animal welfare and integrity of both industries at its core. And then in relation to oversight of that, we have the strategic plans and also the ongoing engagement between our department and both Rasia Con Éireann and HRI in relation to ensuring that that funding is spent in the most effective way possible. And also, of course, then the oversight is provided by the Oireachtas here, of which we have had a fine example today. I know there's different views in relation to the fund, and some are opposed to it, some are opposed to particular aspects of it, and many recognise the benefit of the funding for both industries and are supportive of it. What I would say in terms of Senator Boylan, the point I was making in the Dáil to Senator Carthy was in relation to the importance of this funding. I was pointing out particularly the Sinn Féin approach, whereby there's very different approaches within the party to the actual funding.
There's no difference of opinion. Welfare is welfare.
The Minister without
If you want the industry to succeed and you want people to go to the races, you have to look after welfare.
Welfare is absolutely important and an empowerment to the government as well. But in relation, and I note in your own contribution you did outline that you do support the greyhound sector, that you have obviously are committed to the welfare. Pardon?
I don't like
Senator
it.
But you don't. You said it was the first time I heard you saying it, which was always interesting. You did support that you supported the sector, but certainly Deputy Carthy, in his contribution to the Dáil, was very adamant that he supports the sector and Sinn Féin supports the sector. But the point I was making to him was that whenever I hear different contributions from different members, particularly yourself, that you certainly comes across that you're very against the sector to myself. And the point I was making to Deputy Carthy as well is that Sinn Féin, I expect, though he didn't clarify that in the Dáil, Sinn Féin, I expect, will actually vote against the funding for the horse and greyhound sector today and for this fund, despite the fact that you're saying that you support it. And I also made the point to him that if it was the case that, despite supporting the sector, that those who depend on it for their employment were depending on Sinn Féin, for example, to support the sector in the government, considering that those that you want to go into government with from left-wing parties are all adamantly against it, then those in both the horse racing and greyhound sector have every right to be very concerned about the continued support from your party. But I know across the board then, while others are a lot more clear in their view towards the fund than Sinn Féin are, because as I said to Deputy Carthy, I think you're trying to ride two horses at the one time in relation to this issue. But I recognise there's different views. And I think
there's a singular view on artificial insemination, Minister, so we can have a vote on that and we'll see where Fianna Fáil stands on it.
I think it's healthy that we actually have the debate and that there's oversight of the funding. But I think it's really important from a government point of view that we continue to support both sectors, that we continue to invest through the horse and greyhound fund to underpin what is two really important industries in the country. And I want to thank senators for their contribution today for the amendments that have been put forward. But the government, we won't be accepting the amendments, but we will continue to work closely with both industries to ensure that the funding is spent very effectively, to ensure that integrity and welfare are central to how it's spent, and to ensure that they continue to be really important parts of our economy as well.
Amendment 2 has been moved by Senator Boylan. Is the amendment being pressed?
It is.
Being pressed. Is Amendment 2 agreed to? The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say tá.
Tá.
Those against say kneel. Kneel. I think the question is defeated. I call on Senator Annie Hoey to move Amendment 1.
Yeah, I move.
Move. Seconder?
Yes, the next one.
Seconded. Yeah.
Seconded. Is Amendment 1 agreed to?
Agreed.
No. Not agreed. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say tá.
Tá.
Those against say kneel. Kneel. I think the question is defeated.
Vote all.
Vote all. Finish. Sorry. Inish uncashed. Motion regarding proposed approval by Seanad of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund Regulation 2022 Amendment 1. Amendment 1 in the name of Senator Hoey. The question is that the amendment be made, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Taw, Senator Hoey and Senator Marie Sherlock, and Neil, Senator Sean Coyne and Senator Robbie Gallagher. The division will be conducted electronically. The voting interval is 1 minute starting Inish. Result of the vote, Taw 9, Neil 25. The amendment is defeated. Could I call on Senator Lynn Boylan to move, Senator Boylan? Could I call on Senator Lynn Boylan to move Amendment 3?
I move.
Could I call on seconder? Seconded. Senator Neil O'Donnell seconded. Is the amendment being pressed?
It is.
The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Taw.
Taw.
Those against say Neil. I think the question is defeated.
Vote Taw.
Vote, yeah, 2 and 1. ask senators to take their seats? Could I ask all senators to take their seats? Moshe Daly. Initial Kesht. Motion regarding proposed approval by Seanad of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund Regulations 2022, Amendment 3, in the name of Senator Lynn Boylan. The question is that the amendment be made, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Taw, Senator Lynn Boylan and Senator Neil O'Donnell, and Neil, Senator Sean Coyne and Senator Robbie Gallagher. The division will be conducted electronically. The voting interval is 1 minute starting inish. Result of the vote, Taw 9, Neil 25. The amendment is defeated. Amendment 4, call on Senator Alice Mary Higgins to move the amendment 4. A seconder. And by Senator Eileen Flynn. Are you pressing the amendment?
Yes.
Yeah, the question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Taw.
Taw.
Those against say Neil. I think the question is defeated.
Vote Taw.
Anish uncashed. Uncashed. Motion regarding proposed approval by Seanad of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Funding Regulations 2021 Amendment 4 in the name of Senator Alice Mary Higgins. The question is that the amendment be made, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Taw, Senator Alice Mary Higgins, and Senator Eileen Flynn, and Neil, Senator Sean Coyne and Senator Robbie Gallagher. The division will be conducted electronically. The voting interval is 1 minute starting. Anish. Result of the vote, Taw 11, Neil 26. The amendment is defeated. Could I call on Senator Alice Mary Higgins to move Amendment 5?
I move Amendment 5.
Seconder? It's seconded by Senator Eileen Flynn. The question is that the amendment be made. Sorry, are you pressing it? Sorry, Senator.
Yes.
Press, yeah. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Taw.
Taw.
Those against say Neil. I think the question is defeated. Amendment 6 is in the name of Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
I move.
Move seconded. Amendment being pressed.
Yes.
The amendment being pressed. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Taw.
Taw.
Those against say Neil. I think the question is defeated. Could I call Senator Alice Mary Higgins to move Amendment 7?
I move.
Seconded. Seconded by Senator Eileen Flynn. Is the amendment being pressed?
Yes.
Pressed. The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say Taw.
Taw.
Those against say Neil. I think the question is defeated. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Is that agreed?
Not agreed.
Not agreed. Those in favour say Taw. Those against say Neil.
Neil.
I think the question is carried. Vote all. Okay. This is on the motion itself. Motion regarding proposed approval by Seanad of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund Regulations 2022. The question is that the motion be agreed to. And on that question, a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw, Senator Sean Coyne and Senator Robbie Gallagher, and Neil, Senator Lynn Boylan and Senator Neil O'Donnell. This is an electronic vote and the interval is 1 minute starting in-ish. Result of the vote, Thaw 29, Neil 8. The question is carried.